All right. So previously we created our Docker file and we're able to run you know to create an image to build an image from our Docker file, and we're able to to start to run our container based off our image. Now that was one image, but now if we are going to run, let's say this is the back end mainly, but if we are going to run the back end, run the front end, and run our database, those could be different containers. So we could, let's say, have a container for the database, a container for the back end, and then the container for the front end. Now, in such a case, it would mean that we would create uh, a container for um, each part, and then would, let's say, if we wanted to run our containers, we would go running each of them manually, independently. So that's possible, but it's kind of inconvenient. It would take more time to start, stop those containers. Docker Compose allows us um, to start, stop our containers just by using a single command. All right. So in previously I had a Docker file like this, and then I was able to create a container. But now I have a compose file which I will be explaining, and I'm already able to spin up my containers using compose. And in this compose, I have a database service and I have a backend service. So we'll be seeing how that works. But before we proceed, let's just first go through some basics. Oh, all right. So so basically, what is Docker Compose? Docker Compose is according to the docs, it's a tool for defining, running multi-container Docker applications. Just like I said, you might have a back-end database, front-end, or multiple containers, that you want to run, and this tool helps you in defining and running your containers. We use a YAML file to configure, the app services. So like I showed here, oh, which one is it? Let me just. So like I showed here, we are using a YAML file to configure our app services. So our app, like I said, may contain a database, may have a backend, front end. So each of those can be, a service, defined in the YAML file. So we use a single command to create and start all the services, from our config. So once we have our config, just like here, we can spin it up all with one command. Yeah. And then Compose works in all environments: production, staging, development, testing, as well as CI workflows. Yeah. And then how do we install Compose? So if you are using Docker Desktop, Compose will already be, part of it. So you don't need to install Docker Compose if you are using Docker Desktop. But also, if you have your Docker engine already installed, you also don't need to install Docker because Docker Compose is already part of Docker CLI. Yeah. Yeah. So let's come to using Compose. So what we would do is, let's say, if we wanted to build our own image, for some containers or for some images, let's say like if I'm to like the database or, oh, sorry, using I just opened various VS Code windows. So yes, so what we see in like this backend service, I am basically building an image based, off my Docker file. But the Postgres service, it's using an image. I'm using an already existing image. So this one is being pulled from Docker Hub. So number one, one can, you can define your app's environment with Docker file, so it can be reproduced. So in my case, I had to first define this Docker file for my backend, uh, uh, for the image of my backend, and then of course I come and build it here. Then number two are define the services that make up your app. So in number one, if for the services or for the images which we want to build from Docker files, we first create those Docker files. Then number two, we define the services that make up our app in the Docker compose file. So uh, so for example, so my step number one, I created the Docker file first. So number two, I came here and now define the services in my Docker compose. So again, we will see that this compose can take different names like compose or Docker compose, but that is for later. So number two, I was able to define my services. You can see this one is building using a Docker file, but this one is building using an existing image from Docker Hub. Number three, we run we run this command docker compose app or docker dash compose app. So at first, this is like the first command that was being used when I think Docker was still like had to be installed separately. It still works for backward compatibility, but this would be the command one uses, especially now that compose is part of Docker CLI. All right, so we proceed. So we will go through each and see how to run what happens when we run Docker compose app. So for the commands, Compose has commands for managing the whole life cycle of the application. So we can start, we can stop, we can rebuild the services, we can even view the status of the running services, we can stream the log output of the running services. We can even run a one of command, on a service if we wanted. So there is something to note that compose command overrides the default command declared by the container image. So what this means is that, again, we'll go through this to see to see what each of these means. But what this means is that in compose, for example, if I define a command here and I say python manage run server, this of course will be executed on my container. But we also know that while defining a container, while defining our image, we can, put a command within the Docker file that gets executed when our image is created. When we build our image, this command gets executed automatically. But what this means is that once I define a command here, it will override the command that was specified here. Yeah, so that's what that means. Yes. All right. So so compose specification. So the compose file is a YAML file defining services, networks, volumes for a Docker application. So again, within this file, we can define services, we can define volumes, networks, uh, for our application. The latest recommended version of the compose file by the specification. So if you are wondering about the file format and what file format we should use, so I linked it here, and it is specified here, so this is like a sample file format. Services, you know, backend, front end, backend, then volumes, config, secrets, networks. If you're looking for a file format, that's it. That's the recommended one. So let's look at the compose application model. We talked about that within a compose file we can define services, networks, config, secrets. So let's see what all this means. So what are services? So services are basically, they are defined as computing components of an application. But a service in reality is like an abstract. Uh, let's see. They say a service is an abstract concept implemented on platforms by running the same container image. So you see, what we did is that, okay, for me, from my understanding, putting the definition from the docs aside, is that, again, what I said in the beginning, that if we wanted to have our back-end, front-end database, each of those would be like a separate container, or would have a different image and a container for it. So if we were to say define our back-end, so we'd come here and create a service for our back-end and everything that, um, this would be like a definition for our backend, and the image to use, how to, if there are any configurations we want to make, like setting environmental variables, the name of the container, and all that. So for each of those would be considered as a service, would be defined as a service. And then also these services can communicate with each other. For example, my database can communicate with my backend can communicate with my database. Yeah. Then networks, services communicate with each other through networks. Yeah. So that's a bit clear. And then we also told an IP route is established between containers within services connected together. So that's clear. So volumes store and share persistent data. Now, so for example, now like here, so every time we start a container, then we stop a container, all the data that is associated, that is stored, kind of like gets lost when we stop the container. But we can actually enable persistence of this data, like data can remain if we use volumes. So that's what we mean by saying that we can store and share persistent data into volumes. So basically, the specification describes such a persistent data as a high-level file system mounted with global options. So if you see here in an example of the volume that we defined here, it's basically a file system, if we are to say. With configs, they are like comparable to volumes, in that they are files mounted to the container. So I haven't worked with those, but basically that's what it is. Secret. So if we have data that we want to to expose through the files, we can use secrets. Yeah, again, we'll see more of how that works, but I'm not yet using it here in my. So one thing to note is that secrets and configs are read only, but volumes can be configured as read plus write. So that means that we can read and also write to our volumes, but secrets, we can't write to a secret. What we define, that's it. Or configs, those are read only. So, so just a recap on the compose file, this, just to have some more information. So again, it's a YAML file that defines the version. This version that we put here is kind of deprecated and no longer needed, so we don't actually have to put this. So defines the version, services, services is required, so which means we cannot create a Docker compose file without the services section. So also networks, volumes, and secrets. So in our file, I really define the services, but you see I don't have section for like networks and secrets. So those are not mandatory per se. So now this is important. The default path for a compose file is compose YAML preferred or compose YML in the working directory. So the default location when I say compose Docker compose app, when I spin up the command, automatically compose will be looking for the config for the Docker compose file within the working directory. So this is my working directory, so compose is here. And there is something we are noting here, that it can be a YAML or a YML, and we are saying YAML is preferred and the name compose is now preferred. So previously it used to be docker-compose, but now this is more preferred. Of course, we can still use docker compose .yaml or YML for backward compatibility, but generally going forward, this compose file, compose.yaml is the preferred. And we are told that if both files exist, compose.yaml will be preferred. So if I had, let's say, another file here called docker compose.yaml or .yml, we are told that this will be preferred, will be given first priority, so it will be considered instead of this. Yeah. All right, so that's good to know. All right, so that's mainly about it. Just a recap. So let's now go in and get more into the file, and then we run our we go through it practically and see. So services, we learned what that is. So we have two services, the Docker DB service and Postgres DB service and our backend service. And again, this doesn't have to be named with a service keyword, but I just really named it like this. The naming, I could really name this anything, but I just named it like that so that it's very easy for us to see that this is a service. Yeah. And now, so let's start with the Postgres service. So this will be created from our image. So basically, if we go to Docker Hub and say Postgres, so we basically using that 12.7 12 seems like that is not indicated here, so there's 12.10 but there should be a way of seeing other versions, but yeah, so that's what we are using, this image. So which means our container will be created from this image, that is, a standard and official image. Now, this will be our container name. Once our container is created, this will be the name of the container. And these are some of the environmental variables that we want to define. The Postgres DB will be this. Postgres user will be this, and Postgres password will be this. And the volumes, so what we are doing here is we are mapping the data, this directory, which is this is created. If we don't have it, it is actually created automatically. This was actually created automatically once I spin up, once I run the compose command. So it is mapped to the Postgres, to this directory within our container. Yeah. So that is how data gets persisted. So I'd put this section for ports, but I figured I may not need it. But we can also do port mapping here, where we map the port, our host port to the container port. Um, uh, but even if I take out this, it still works fine. Yeah. So then we now define our backend service. Now for our backend, we are building the image. So build this dot will mean that it will, while building, it will look for the Docker file within the working directory, and the Docker file is here. So we are actually building from this set of instructions in our Docker file, and then the image name will be this, and then so once we build our image, this will be the image name, and then the container name will be this. Once we build once we start our container from this image, and then what we are basically saying here is that um, our computer, our local host port, my computer port 8000 is going to be mapped to the container port 9090. So this means that I would expect to be running on this port. That's why I'm mapping it. Later on, I will try to run it on this port. So the command will try to run it on this port. So volumes again are, so this creates this folder on the container. We will see that later. So it means that whatever is in my current directory, which is represented by dot, my working folder, is mapped to this folder on my container. Yeah. So everything that I have in my working directory will be put in this folder and persisted there. All right. So this command starts is what like starts my container. This is what is executed when my container starts. And now this backend service depends on the Postgres service. So because ideally our database, our backend is going to be using this database. Yeah, is going to be using this database. So yeah, we say that our our backend service depends on this service, and this name has to be the same. And one thing to note here is that if a service is dependent on another service, that service, like this service, must be defined first before this. So if, for example, we took this down here, it won't work because it won't be found. So we have to define it first and then add it here on depends on. Yeah. So now, before I start, I run it. In my settings, one might be wondering, when this container runs, how does my application actually connect to my database? So in my settings, I have the default this database settings. So the database name that I'll enclose this. The database name that I specified here is, because once this container is created, this database will be created. This will be the username and this will be the password. So this will be set up once my database gets created, once my image gets created, or once my container gets created. Now, our application is going to connect to that same database name that we defined here, okay? And the same user and the password that we set, okay? So this is set when the container runs, when we spin up our container. Now, then we now connect to it within our application. And now, since the database will be exposed as a service, at first I made the mistake of putting like an IP address here, like localhost. That won't work because localhost won't be found. Yeah, like it will try to look for the database on the localhost of the container, which won't actually be there. So this is our database is exposed as a service, so we have to be connecting. The host here has to be the service that is being exposed. Yeah, and that will work. So enough of the talk. Let me run it, and I already ran it. So what I want to do is so if I say docker compose app, it runs fine, but let me first delete everything so that we run it afresh. So if I say docker ps, this shows me all if I want to see the running I've stopped the containers, so there is no running container, but we have the existing containers that were already created. So what I want to first do is delete these containers, both of them. I can say container remove each one manually, but I can also, if I have multiple, I can remove all the containers that will be returned from this command. So that helps me. That should container remove docker ps. So I supposed to say container ls or ps minus a. So all the containers are deleted. All right, so now I can delete the images. Again, if I try to delete the images before the containers, I will get an error because they will tell me that there are some containers dependent on the images. So now that I've deleted the containers, I can go ahead and delete the images as well. So I can actually say image remove. If I want to remove multiple of them, so docker image ls, boom. So if I say docker images, now I don't now have the images. So I also want to go ahead and delete this folder that was created as by our service. Okay. So it's not allowing me to delete this. Let me first change the permissions so that I can change mode. Let me change the permissions so that I can be able to delete it. Data. Perfect. So now that let me now delete it. Perfect. So now we don't have a running container. We don't have even any container. If I display all, we don't have any images. We are at 0. So we have our doc, we have our compose file, we have everything. So now I want to now run the command, the mighty compose command. So I'll say docker compose app. Again, I can use docker compose app, it will work, but I can also say docker compose app. And again, if I am not sure of what happens, I can always use the help. And even if I say docker help, yes. So if I'm not sure of the command, I can say docker compose help or docker compose help. So we see we have several commands that we can execute. We can build or rebuild those services. We can create services. So I may just want to create the services and do nothing extra. I may just want to list the images and all that. Yeah. So this app creates and starts the containers, but I can choose to only create or to only run, the containers. So restart. So there are multiple of them. So I will just use Docker Compose. Let me clear this. So Docker Compose app. Moment of truth. There's this error that I kept getting. Thinking that might be because I don't know if it attempted to pull this image from apps from Docker app, but maybe that's the reason for this error. But still, think it will be fine because we actually built it. We're building it ourselves and giving it a name. So it's building, setting up and building our Postgres service. So it should pull the image and then create a container. So it should pull the image, create a container, and start the container. Because we said Docker compose app creates and starts the container. So it should do that. So I think it is now downloading the image. It's downloading the image. Okay. So pull complete. All right. So it's wow. So let's sort of see what happened. So it pulled, and then it was able to pull, and then boom, boom, boom. We can see what it did, and then we see these are commands create in our Docker file. So at this point, it was now here building our backend, building from our Docker file. See, these are the commands we have in our Docker. These are the instructions in our Docker file, and exporting image. Boom. So finally, we see that the container this is created. This container is created, and also we have this backend container, which is this created, attaching to so this container and this container. I'm not sure if that is because of this, depends on, but yeah. Okay. So you see some things here. The files belonging to the database system will be owned by user Postgres. Yeah, that's what we defined there. Yeah, I see some info here. Let's see if there's any other important info. Success, you can now start the database using, boom. So our database was successfully, container successfully set up. Then it's now starting it for us. Yeah, database system is ready to accept connections. Done. Server started. Create database. Then it created our database that we defined here. All right. So that looks like it. So then also now our backend, our container starting, boom, and now we are good. So we have 19 unapplied migrations. So if we go here, remember we mapped it's running on 9090 like we defined here. And there is something we need to note here, that in my file I had put this command to run at 9,000, but the fact that I actually specified a new command in my compose, it overrode this, and that's why we have this running on port 9090. I specifically put it like that so that we would see the difference, because if I put it to 9,000, we would maybe think, oh, maybe it's this. But since this is now running on a different port, we can actually see that this is not the command that is being considered, it's this that is being considered. All right, so let's see if that works well. Remember, we mapped our port 8000 to port 9090 on the container. So let's see the moment of truth. Wow, moment of truth is here. Ooh. So I can't see my admin. So all right, this makes sense because we haven't run the migrations yet. Let's see if we can run the migrations. So I'm going to connect to the container. Docker compose. Let's see. Let me get some help. So there is an execute command that we can execute a command in the running container. So let me see docker ps. So my containers are running perfectly. So what I want to do is connect to the container and execute a command and run the migrations. So I will do docker compose exec. I want to run it in interactive mode. Again, we can seek some help here if we wanted. I want to run it in interactive mode. All right, maybe I may not need that. So let me just say, okay, let me just say bash. Okay, so docker compose exec service command. Let me requires at least. Well, I haven't used this command. Let me just use docker container exec. Let me run this in interactive mode. Yeah, there is interactive mode, and yeah, so I will do that. I will run this in interactive mode. Allocate sudo tty. So I will. What container am I running? Am I connecting to? I want to connect to. Can use the container name or the container ID. So I want to connect to this. And what command do I want to execute? I want to write. So now I am on my console. In my container, I'm inside my container now. We can see that we are connected on root of this container ID, which is basically here. Okay. All right. So let's try to see. And before we continue, if I like go back, we can see that this volume that was defined in our backend service is actually here. This folder is actually here. All right. And yeah, so let me enter again. So I want to run my migrations, so I can say, so let me see what version I have here. Okay. All right. So I will run make migrations to. Okay, so I'll just say migrate. All right, so I've migrated. So let me come back here. I stop my containers and run again. All right, so I no longer have a message telling me to run migrations because I've actually run the migrations. Perfect. Wow, so that's Kawa. That's good. That's good. Or so we need to set our super user. So I will come here and Python. Oh, I'm out of my container. So let me go back. So I want to say Python manage.py.create super user. Okay. Boom. Set the password. Perfect. So let me try again and see. Wow. Perfect. I don't expect to have any data there. All right. So let me see first name, Gilbert. Right. So, all right. Perfect. So we now have some data. So what I'm going to do, let me stop my container. Let me stop my containers and then see what happens if I spin them up again. Boom. Spin it up again. Perfect. So I want to see. Wow, the data got persisted. Yeah. So uh, the data got persisted. So it means Docker compose down. All right. So let me run it again. Boom. I refresh. So once I take down my containers and bring them back up, my data is still persisted. Yeah. So that's really good. But of course, in real production, if we didn't want to like maintain the database ourselves, we could use like an online service for, like maybe AWS RDS for like our database, such that we have like our AWS managing the database for us. But if we chose to actually run it, on a container that we manage ourselves, so be it. That would still be fine. Yeah. So this is how it all works with Docker Compose, and I'll be making another video uh, if anything comes up. Thank you so much. Before I go, if you wanted to check out the docs are here. They are part of Docker documentation, so there is Docker Compose here, so you can pretty much get started here, installing and all the other stuff. Yeah. So thank you so much. See you next time.